Good afternoon, and welcome to the breakout session. We're calling it Delivering on the Promise of Fleet Electrification. So electric transportation is one of the key themes here for EEI 2022 because it has the potential to be transformational for both the electric power industry as well as the transportation industry. And the environmental benefits are clear and only increasing as we continue to navigate our way through our clean energy path. So when done properly, transportation electrification opens new opportunities for efficiencies and operating cost savings, but it also requires us to work differently with the customers that we serve. So commercial fleet operators, in particular, could become significant power users, right, as they transition to electricity for fuel. And so this can have a significant impact in terms of infrastructure, operations, and also how we all work together. EEI and its members have deep, long-standing relationships with national corporate customers, and particularly on the energy management side, but we're now recognizing the need to quickly expand to include fleet electrification to this emerging need. So Verizon is represented here today, and it's a great example of one of our corporate customers, but also, Amazon and Walmart and even the federal government have really joined the conversation and have increasingly engaged with EEI's national key account workshops. And locally at UNS, where I work, we've had the opportunity to partner with some of our key customers, including the City of Tucson, Pima County, and even Customs and Border Protection. And what we can offer them is our technical expertise, as well as the commitment to invest in charging infrastructure to help accelerate electrification. So these factors are finally all coming together, and it feels like maybe fleet electrification is finally going to be real. So we have the product availability, policy drivers, and sustainability goals, but really to deliver on this potential, we have to do a lot of work together. So I'm delighted to get to moderate this panel today. We have some amazing panelists and really excited for what they're going to share. I'm going to ask each of the panelists an opening question. It's an opportunity for you guys to introduce yourselves as well as share your perspective. So first I'd like to introduce Ted Cannis, who's the CEO of Ford Pro. Thanks for being here today. And Ted, you have some exciting EV products that are ready for fleet operations. We'd love to hear about that, but also as well, this new business that you've stood up in Ford Pro.
All right, Susan, thanks very much. Hey, everybody, glad to be here. After COVID, I decided no more suits, only swag, so that's what we're getting. and not much haircutting either. So, and it's irritating me more than you. What I'd really like to say is this, before this job, I was running global electrification. The products became Mustang Mach-E and Lightning and the E-Transit and the roaming charging network that we did. Because in Ford, we are really focused on the commercial business. We are super strong there, and we were going to lean into that business. And that's what we really did. We have 40% truck and van share in North America. We are the leaders in Europe. And we were going to lean into that business. Here we are years later. We're launching the E-Transit. We already launched in North America and in Europe. We've launched the Lightning. I'm driving my Tesla Lightning all over the place, cooking breakfasts in the front, doing rock concerts in the tailgates, amazing new things that power can do. And it's a great time, but it's not enough. So we created Ford Pro a year ago to do something because for our commercial customers, and especially small and medium, but we adjust all small, medium, and large businesses, like Ken's, and we do all this together because it's a bunch of fragmented solutions. If you're a fleet manager, you got to piece together vehicles and software and charging and service and financing. It's a pain in the ass and nothing works together. And the software really doesn't work together. So we put this business together, small, medium, and large, all different vocations. There's a myth out there that anybody that wants to go electric is only in the delivery business, which is only 10% of the van business. It's a lot of different vocations. But most importantly, the average customer for us, 125,000 fleet accounts, 10 to 15% of them rotate their vehicles per year. Because who has the capital to flip the whole fleet? So they're going to phase into electrification, and many of you are phasing into electrification with both internal combustion and battery electric. So we said we would do it all together. one-stop shop, one common digital front end, one common service architecture across all those solutions, one integrated platform. And that's what we're bringing to our customers now. It is a total change for how we've been doing business for 100 years, and that's what we're doing.
I can feel your energy, love your passion. I think you're the right leader for this.
Maybe.
So Ken Jack, you're the Vice President of Fleet Operations for Verizon. We'd love to hear about kind of your perspective on fleet electrification and how that ties into your corporate sustainability goals as well as your business strategy.
Sure, thanks. And thanks everybody for having me. Like Ted, after COVID, I decided I was going to put on a suit because I haven't seen this in the back of the closet in about 4 years. I was just kind of curious if it still fit. Luckily it does. You know, I'm really so passionate about this transformation. I've spent a lot of time in the fleet business and am a recovering utility employee. I spent 17 years at Con Ed also running their fleet, and I've seen sort of the evolution and the ebbs and flows as we've talked about propane and natural gas and electrification and hydrogen, and we've talked about all these transformations, and it seems like we're suddenly at this inflection point finally where it's really, you know, moving forward. I take that to Verizon and I think about the way that our stakeholders, the expectations that they bring to us, and I think this is, you know, this is something that I hear throughout the industry. I'm on a number of boards representing other fleets and their operations and their interests. And everybody says the same thing about, you know, responding to their stakeholders, not just their shareholder, but external stakeholders, the communities that they operate in, what the employees expect. It becomes a competitive advantage for a company to be able to demonstrate the transformative, you know, steps that are needed to both their own employee base as well as to the customers, as well as to the shareholders that have expectation of them. And all of those things are sort of propelling us because we get it from all sides. Most companies, you know, not unlike the utility industry, we've got some connection to some overarching sustainability target in terms of whether it's the 1 degree challenge or other, you know, societal frameworks in terms of what we need to do and when we need to do it by. And so fleets, just like mine, are, to Ted's point, you know, we're trying to figure out how to take that natural pathway that exists because we're always replacing portions of our fleet and kind of changing things out over time. How do you take that next step that when the next opportunity is presenting itself, that you're ready to make the electric transition and all the work that has to go behind that? So, you know, for Verizon, our fleet is a small piece of, and we may be a little bit unique in some regards because of the amount of energy that we use for other things. So our scope 2 emissions, purchase power going into data centers, lighting up networks, much like other high-tech companies, the data centers, et cetera, consume a lot, and that's a big piece of your footprint, but that's not what your stakeholder sees. They identify the visible pieces. So they identify your corporate campus, they identify other things that you're doing in your supply chain, they identify your fleet operation as the things that resonate to them as to which company, as they have choices in the market, what's making them make the decisions that they make. And so all of those things conflate to, you know, we have to do more and we have to do it faster.
No pressure.
No pressure at all, yeah.
Great, thank you. So Adrian Rouse is the lead EV strategy and planning for Deloitte. Thanks for being here. So Adrian, as an analyst in this space, my question for you kind of goes back to my opening statement. I said that it feels like we're ready, that this is becoming real probably in the next several years. Do you agree with that? And kind of what's the trajectory that you see?
Yes, thanks, Susan, very much. So I'd also like to say it's a great pleasure to be here. I've been a long-term admirer of EEI, so as I say, great pleasure to be here. And, absolutely, yes, we are. I think there probably isn't anyone in the room who would say that we're not either at or past tipping point for EVs. I think that it's pretty much a done deal. There are lots of problems and challenges, and I think we all know those as well. There's probably not anyone in the room who isn't familiar with that as well. So yes, I think in spite of all of that, this is it.
Here we go.
Yep, here we go.
All right,
I mean,
great.
I actually spent several years going around the US, actually visiting utilities predominantly, a lot of the big utilities. And I was saying, this is going to happen quickly, it's going to happen fast, it's going to happen faster than you think. And probably one of the few times in my life I was actually right. So that was good. But I still think we are under forecasting, we are under projecting. I still think that even though the projections have been increased, they're still not going high enough, fast enough. I will say, just on the plane down here, I was looking at the proposed specifications for heavy-duty charging infrastructure in Europe, which has been released fairly recently, and I think they're underdoing the scale of the charging capacity they're going to need by 3- or 4-fold.
Wow.
Way below.
Yeah.
So I still think we're totally underestimating. So.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I think everyone on this stage hopes you're right. So, I'd love to hear Ted and Ken respond to this. So Ted, I mean, we're talking about customer demand could really skyrocket here. And so what's Ford doing to really prepare and make sure that you're able to deliver from both a manufacturing and a business standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, demand is huge, both retail and commercial. If you look at how we look at the industry, and we had huge debates, as you commend, angst inside the company 2 or 3 years ago about how much demand, and suddenly we're at 200,000 F-150 Lightning reservations last year and had to cancel out. E-Transit sold out for the model year here in North America and in Europe. So we're going to build 600,000 EVs by 24 and 2 million globally by 2026. Batteries and securing all the pipeline, all of that, the plants, the JVs, the raw materials, all the way through the system, because it's coming that fast. If the message I'd tell you is there is a huge amount of force and the demand is shocking. So that's what's going on our side, and that means in the van business, we figure 70% is electric by the end of the decade. At least 30 to 40% of the pickups minimum are electric by the end of the decade. So you're talking huge demand. That means we also, not just in the manufacturing, we had to invest in all sorts of different things. We're investing in recycling materials with redwood materials. We're doing solid power, solid state batteries, JV plants and batteries, as I already mentioned. And the whole ecosystem is the key for us. So not only the roaming public charging that can go network to network so that we can have that back end for our public charging, but we also need the integration in the back end for home, employee home, and depot charging. We acquired Electrify last year, specializing commercial depot charging, so that we could knit this all together, because as the largest in our space, if we can't knit it all together to make it easy, well, for the fleet managers, they're going to get pummeled because their boards are telling them to go, and most of them have never charged and don't own an EV.
Right. Absolutely. So from the customer's perspective, Ken, what's your electric transportation electrification plan look like? How do you see it transitioning? And I guess what signals are you looking for to know that, hey, I can really start buying in large volumes?
Right. I think, like you said, it's going to happen much faster than we really anticipate. When you candle the umbrella commitments against sort of what fleets normally look like as they transition, there's this sort of collision. It says you have to do a lot in a very short period of time, right? So we're really focused on sort of all of the piece parts. We're looking at public infrastructure and saying, what is that looking like? And we were talking behind the scenes about NEVI and how that plays out, and how does that support both sort of the retail transition as well as commercial fleets and local service fleets, utility government fleets. You think about everybody that has to operate in a geography. They've all got a slightly different use case. So they're all looking for different telltales about the things that are key to the way that they operate as being fulfilled before they can put their foot in the water and say, okay, we're off and running. But we only have so much time to wait. So at some point, you have to kind of start pushing those things. So we're looking for charging. We're looking for those kind of assurances from manufacturers. We're trying to understand what the capacity looks like and what we can actually programmatically line up funding. So we're working with lots of folks around securing funding to sort of underwrite these transformations. I think the driver acceptance, I think the employee expectations are already there. So I probably have more people that ask me every week, when is my department going to start getting electric vehicles? We say all these things, then I can really fulfill, because the pieces aren't there. But we're starting to see the pieces line up. I think the battery technology, the availability of charging, the ability to do depot charging, the ubiquity of telematics is huge for fleets. And then the partnerships with the utilities. I mean, I'm seeing many more good conversations. I appreciate this sort of forum and your key customer forums as ways to kind of put those ideas out there about how do we best strategically put the plans together. I realize how much this represents for utilities, and we were joking behind the scenes. I remember back in another career, in another lifetime, drawing maps for, distributed generation interconnection. And it's a lot of the same kinds of conversations when you start talking about EV readiness and saying, where can I put charging, which depots, can I address, and how? So I think those are some of the things we're looking for.
Yeah, for sure. So Adrian, let's now focus a little bit on the players in this space. So, today we have represented a utility, a manufacturer, a customer. It feels like, we're kind of the critical players, but we're not the only players, certainly, right? You have the manufacturers of the charging stations, software, services, things like that. So maybe give us a sense, your sense of the landscape at this point and which entities are best equipped to do what.
Okay, so I think I say that 90% of this industry is still white space. I think the vast majority of it is still very much up for grabs. We're seeing a lot of backward and forward integration. I mean, the services and products that Ted was describing, I think a lot of those are going to be relatively new for Ford in some ways. So there's definitely a lot of backward and forward integration. But I find, there are two things that are really interesting. One, I think distributed generation. We all know that is a really big part of this solution. So that sector's going to be growing more quickly, I think, than previously. And it hasn't grown that fast in some ways. In some places, in some ways, hasn't grown that quickly. But I think with the NEVI funding coming through for grid resilience, that's going to be a real catalyst for those smaller power systems. The needs of fleet, the need to get around demand charges. So I think those smaller scale systems, that's going to be a really interesting space where you're going to see a lot of new people getting into it. And then software and grid management, asset management around the grid. That is still almost, I'm going to say, a black box. We know we have the technology in many ways, but actually being able to implement a smart charging program, being able to really do that, to crack that nut, that is going to be a really exciting and interesting space as well. So those are the two big areas. Who's best to be in there? I think we're going to see a lot of newcomers. Utilities, though, have to be in there. Utilities have got to be in there, and I think it's easy to say, but I've always been trying to promote the idea that utilities take a more proactive role, and many ways in which they can do that, and it's easy to say, but I'll just leave it there for now.
If I could maybe just tag on to something you said, I think what I'm seeing that's new as I talk to other fleets and folks that operate, tens or hundreds or thousands of depots, or are looking at, technicians or critical services that are home dispatched or things like that. Anybody who has some sort of technical facility is realizing now that there's also an intersection now between the fleet and the traditional property management function or the energy management function that existed in corporations. So, we look at facilities and we start thinking about the synergies between enabling electric transportation transition as well as resilience, as well as renewables, as well as, to some degree, hedging on electric prices, right? So when you bring all those things together, it creates, 1 and 1 becomes 3, and you start looking at the combination of those things differently, as opposed to being separate things. And you're seeing lots more, I hear lots more big fleets talk about their fleet organizations and their real estate or energy teams kind of coming together in a new way that historically wasn't needed.
Which led to the formation of Ford Pro, right? Realizing that it needs to be much more than just selling vehicles. And so, Ted, can you talk a little bit about some of maybe the key pain points that you're trying to solve for customers, and maybe which types of customers you're trying to target?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll build on what Ken and Adrian said. So first of all, when you look at it, we did a fleet survey. We did this also, a Mythbuster survey when we were getting ready for Mach-E launch. People were like, yeah, actually, I'm afraid to charge in a puddle. Or, can you charge in the rain? The things they don't tell you that they all learned in school, or mom. And so this on FleetBuster, they're like, yeah, 60% think it's going to be a major head gig across North America and Europe to do electrification. They've been told to do it. They've been buying quarts of oil. Now they have to go a kilowatt. What's a kilowatt? Never had a kilowatt on my site before. Somebody else buys them, and they don't know what they're doing. So they're trying to get this information to pull it together. And it's layers on layers of information. First place they go, I got to do public charging. Yeah, but 2 seconds into the conversation, but public charging is long dwell times at employee paid time, not ideal, no reservations, that you have DC impact on the battery. That is your last stop. So we have, well, where do you fuel? I never had to ask a fleet customer where they fueled before. They go to some gas station, didn't matter to me. Now, oh no, and my service employees take the vehicles home, my other employees go to a depot, and we have a combination of all these, and we need backup public charging. So we created integrated services that would support those. And God forbid you ask about preconditioning the battery. Preconditioning, what's that? Does it get a little hotter for the customer in their cabin? No, it's heating up the chemicals of the battery so you can get range. And they can't do it unless we can reach through the firewall in the vehicle. They'll go buy a software solution off the shelf, and they say, oh yeah, we can precondition your vehicle. They can't. Can they open the doors and turn it off? No, they can't. Can they get cloud-based range estimates of real-world driving at different conditions, temperatures, etc.? They can't. But they're getting told a story that everybody's ready, and every charging company is isolated and doesn't want to pass along to the other ones, and they don't want to integrate into the back-end systems of SAP or Oracle, whatever the guys have. So we had to put something end to end, because if we're going to be the largest, the main thing is the fleet customer has to be happy that we can do their business. They can do their job. Their job is helping their wireless customers. It is not running a fleet. That's the heavy work that we have to do. It's plumbers want to plumb, roofers want a roof. They don't want to be fussing around with stuff in the back end. And that's what we were building this all around, is to create those integrated solutions. And we will carry the whole load. If something breaks and the software doesn't connect between firmware on the charger, the vehicle software, the e-telematics software surrounding, if it doesn't, we say, look, we'll take it all on as Ford. Any error in the system, any back-end error on the charging or energy side, that's us. And that's how we're going to do the confidence side.
That's good.
Well, as a fleet owner myself, that sounds really
Sounds
great.
pretty good.
Yeah.
Or my bill is going up a lot.
For sure. So Ken, how are you thinking about this developing product, equipment, and service landscape? What do you see as critical solutions that you'll need to succeed? And are you relying on kind of your traditional partners, or are you looking for new solution providers?
I'll just say ditto to what Adrian and, and to what Ted said. I think there's a lot of white space, so I think there are solutions that we haven't even defined as a need yet, and there's opportunity for lots of folks to kind of put something forth. I think Ford Pro has put something forth in terms of, the telematics piece is a huge piece of this. For fleets that are out there vocational, whether you're delivery, whether you're a service fleet, whether you're nomadic, whether you sort of operate in a given geography, being able to know how you're going to operate. The first question I get from my operations teams are, how do I know that this new ecosystem is going to be reliable? We've all lived through, storm responses and so forth, and trying to reason through how you're going to do that. So do you have backup power? Do you have resilience? Do you have line of sight into the vehicles to know how much work they've got left in them for the day? So I think, telematics, that ubiquity, that platform that ties all that information together, that's smart enough to kind of predict some things, that takes into account that the energy picture is different. What we're used to in terms of replenishing a given amount of energy in a vehicle was, well, you just drove around for 5 minutes and eventually you found a gas station and you bought a volume of a hydrocarbon and you put it in the vehicle almost instantaneously. It requires a little bit more thought. It's certainly doable, and when you do it right, you get the sustainability, you get the stakeholder satisfaction, you get the employee satisfaction, you get the community and the customer, respect for making that transition. You're saving money on maintenance, all the good things, but you have to put the thought into it, and you have to have the system to support that. So I think the telematics is big. I think the availability, reliability, and transparency into available public charging infrastructure, because that is going to be a piece of, if not the primary, at least the backup solution, to say, I do a certain amount of charging in a controlled environment, but then I leave the four walls and I have to go somewhere else, and I need to know that there's going to be enough of it at a high enough charge rate that I know the status of that equipment. And then I think the last piece is going to be sort of the technology in the vehicles themselves. And when I think about, we were joking downstairs about some of the early EVs and other alternative fuel vehicles that we've seen over the last 30 plus years, the technology is so much further ahead of where it used to be, to the point that it really satisfies the need, but knowing now that we have the reliability of it, right? So there's a lot resting on fleet operators that, operate thousands, or in my case, tens of thousands of vehicles across the country. That's a huge invested base. And now almost my biggest investment is really in that lithium ion, right? I have more money tied up in lithium than anything.
Yeah.
You guys have investment in copper, I have investment in lithium because the size of the fleet and the investment in that. So knowing that, removing some of the doubts and the questions, there's lots of, question about how do we deal with residual value? How do we deal with sort of long-term longevity and warrantability? Are we willing to pay up for a higher quality product that's guaranteed to take us through that high criticality operational expectation of, our service fleets without downtime, reliable, holds its capacity. So I think you need all those things together.
A lot of change management there, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's not the least of it, I think. Yeah, that's a good point. And the people side of it, you have workforces in a lot of cases, or you have public perception, the questions about the myth busting, We can't underestimate the change management. And so doing all of these things in a measured fashion and being able to communicate to people how that's going to look over time, the biggest thing I struggle with is trying to convey a picture to my operations teams, my drivers, my finance folks, about what the transition looks like, who needs to be told what when in the process as the transition moves forward. We have some of Ted's products coming in towards the tail end of this year, and we say, how do I educate my mechanics? How do I educate my drivers, my finance folks? My energy procurement team has to think about, they're going to be buying energy differently. They need to think about sourcing renewable grid, so.
Right. Well, we'll get to that part next. So we have a lot of electric company executives here, right? And when we get together, we talk about what can we be doing, or what can we and what should we be doing really to, I would say, unlock the potential of this market. And so I'm gonna invite you guys into a virtual UNS boardroom and ask you to share with us what action could we be taking as a company, maybe one or two suggestions of things we can be doing to really accelerate fleet electrification. So Adrian, I'll start with you.
Okay, thank you. Well, which utility boardroom is this?
It's mine.
It's yours. Okay.
UNS,
TE.
Arizona.
UNS, okay. You're doing a fantastic. No, I think I would say I think so talking about fleet, right? We're talking about fleet. I think the New York State EV order was pretty good. Was pretty clear in there being a need for utilities to proactively help fleets electrify. That was a part of the regulatory order. And I have the pleasure of working with a couple of the big fleets in New York. And I can tell you, it is incredibly complicated for them. It really is so difficult. And there's an awful lot, I think, that utilities can do to ease that burden. One of the things, let's say you've got a big urban fleet. They have all those batteries. Ken being the biggest lithium investor on the planet all of a sudden. No, they have a lot of batteries, and of course they're going to have a lot more batteries, and we're talking thousands of megawatt hours of capacity. So I think a utility, in a case of a big city like a New York, where you're going to have thousands of megawatt hours of mobile capacity, the utility could really help work out what is the highest and best use of those battery systems. How can we use those, integrate that into the grid, help us meet our renewable targets? And that means the utility has to accept that that transit agency, that fleet, is now a different type of customer. It's not the same customer it used to be. It's not just a load. It needs to be brought into the discussion, brought into the business model. And otherwise, what's going to happen is New York State, there was a study done fairly recently by a well-respected consultant, almost as well-respected as Deloitte, although not quite. But they concluded that New York needed like 10,000 megawatts of storage to meet its renewable energy goals. So there are two options. One, let's build 10,000 megawatts of stationary storage, right? And let's let another 10,000 megawatts drive down the state and have no role in this. Or let's not double pay for the same thing and use that mobile storage to help meet that 10,000 megawatt goal. And I think that concept applies across all the big cities. And I think utilities could be very much a part of that. So that's what I would That's what I would say to the board.
Great.
But I clear it with you first.
Well, thank you for the advice. And Ted, how about you? What would you recommend to our board?
It's funny, one of the last advisories I did for a board meeting was for a large retail gasoline company that was worried about the threat of what would happen in 2019, just before COVID. Kind of the reverse advice, because the environment has changed. And having done a lot of general management jobs, and I ran investor relations at Ford, this kind of thing of advising boards, or how do you see it coming? I think the first thing before the comments would be two things. One is that this thing is coming so fast. You've heard of it is coming so fast. The resources are putting in place. You have no idea how, and I say that knowing how long it takes us to work with utilities as we put in these depot charging and home installations, how many months and months. It's months of negotiating with the companies, and then it's months to get it in. So with those backgrounds, and that public charging for most fleet customers is a secondary solution. It's a top-up if I have to. It is not primary path for multiple reasons. So the first thing is got to make that plan to invest in the commercial space. You have to have a plan. The regulatory plan that you guys have, the investment plan, how are you going to secure fundings for a kind of solution that has specific on-site locations or employee home driving? We can handle the driver reimbursement, et cetera, but somebody's still got to do something local. So that is definitely part of the plan. The second thing, I think it really requires a dedicated team with a lot of focus, because it's working with a lot of installations at individual company sites. Maybe Ken's got sites all over the country in many different jurisdictions. And I think what's particularly pertinent right now is the economy just did a major twist. We had free money, and there are a lot of people out there advising software companies and charging companies and this companies. And the chance to burn a lot of money that will go into installations where nothing will happen and just wasted funds is high right now as things are quickly changing. And so I think, who are the partners that you're going to select on this journey is going to be really important strategically. The last one, in our case, because we built F-150 Lightning to give back to the households into the grid, we're running some pilots. We think this is a big opportunity. In our data, it looks like a lot of people park and plug in at night, both residential, and they're going to be commercially, and demand alerts. We're all about that, and we're setting up all our system to do it, but we only can do it when we're partnered with you guys. So for me, that would be definitely third on the list, because the volume of products is going up quickly.
Great advice, thank you. I'd love to follow the Lightning, the F-150 Lightning, the backup power. So tell us, how does that work? Like, we obviously hear about it in terms of the residential customers being able to power their homes. I think we talked about it earlier today in a segment where they were talking about this is a great opportunity for underserved communities to have backup generators in their vehicles. But how do you see that in the commercial space, or the commercial fleet space?
Well, we see it for both, because obviously the F-150, one of the great reasons you can get it at $39,000 for 230 miles of 4x4 range is because of the massive scale of F-150. When the seats are being spread over lots of units, so using that battery power is key for us. So in our partnership with Sunrun, we said we would put all the structure in. We put for the 300-mile range, we also put it on the onboard charger, extra chargers. You get AC charge overnight. We think it's all there, power ready, and a lot of small businesses, we're doing pilots on the commercial side already. We think it's a supply that is ready, and a lot of companies have schedules. Maybe it's weekend only, but most of them are not working 24/7 because they don't even have the labor to do 24/7, even they want to. So there is a way to give back to the grid, and if it's plugged in already, it's ready, storage, ready to go. And it just requires planning, rate tables, which the whole thing needs, and that would be part of your plans for commercial customers anyway. It just needs that planning and testing and scheduling, and it can happen, I think, quite easily if we all really get our acting gear.
Yeah, pretty exciting.
It is really awesome, frankly.
Yeah. So Ken, as you electrify your fleet, you're going to become a significant power. I mean, you already are with your data centers and other things, right? But your power usage is really going to expand. And so beyond just providing you energy, what can we do to help support you and your goals?
I have a long list, but I'll focus on one or two that I think are really, really key. I kid. I think, Ted, you touched on it, the idea of the risk of sort of burning through, we've seen incentive programs, over the years, and the risk of burning through it without really creating a lasting momentum or kind of finally getting over the hill to the point that something is self-sustaining is real. I think, to Adrian's comments about the pace at which this needs to roll out, we're still underestimating how quickly that's going to happen. When I think about Verizon's footprint, and we have hundreds of sites that we installed workplace charging, or we installed charging for limited deployments of EVs in the past. That occurred over a long period of time, and it was still painful then. And I don't mean that in a pejorative. It just takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of coordination. And what I hear from a lot of fleets as they're contemplating this right now is that there isn't a good place to go. And some places have it a little bit better than others, so I don't mean it to say that nobody has it. But the quality and the depth of the information varies from locale to locale in terms of, does anybody have an integrated picture of what the potential is for the market? So what does the retail segment transitioning look like? Where are the clusters of fleet operators and transit operators and so forth, and what does their transition and timeline look like? And then how do you lay that on top of your your own system planning and your substation and your feeders and your capacity? We don't have a place where all of that exists. And so I spend an increasing portion of my day job now has become working with different industry groups that represent fleets or are an intersection of fleets and utilities, trying to figure out a way that we can start to put that together. So, if I had an ask of anybody, to your last question, my ask of, the folks in the audience is, if this sounds like you and you think that this is something that you can do, can we work with you through, like I said, some of those industry and trade organizations to maybe show a proof of concept of what this could look like? Because I firmly believe in my heart that it would make for the most effective use of everybody's capital in terms of deployment to actually be able to thread through all these different layers. What's the outcome going to look like, right? How much carbon am I displacing because I know what it's going towards, as opposed to a build it and they will come. I'm sure it will. I'm not saying that they won't, but it may be a little bit more measured and it may be a little bit more impactful, certainly at the early stages of trying to convince everybody who's not there yet as to how great this can be if we have these really well integrated plans. So that would be kind of my ask.
Yeah, okay, great. So maybe building on that, and this will be our last question because we're running out of time here. Adrian, we talked a little bit in the back room about kind of grid planning and
Yes.
and kind of building on what Ken just shared. I mean, typically we see load coming slowly. This is going to come really fast. So how do we prevent from being the bottleneck?
As the utility?
Yeah.
Well, I think in some ways it's a regulatory issue because from what I see, utilities are planning for all sorts of new load all the time. This just happens to be an EV load, but the planning, the distribution planning has been going on. But there's still no requirement to include EVs in the planning forecast that the regulator needs. So I think it should be a regulatory requirement that utilities include EV projections in their forecasts. Not all states require that. I know in Virginia, for example, they don't require it. It's one of the biggest utilities in the country. So that's one thing that I think could be done, but I would put that as much as anyone on the regulator. Make it a regulatory requirement. But the real issue that I see on the grid planning side is that the grid is not designed to provide short, sharp shocks of power. There's a total mismatch between the way a really efficient fleet vehicle needs to charge and operate and the way the grid operates. The grid is basically designed for base load power with a fairly predictable peaky nature. Right. Now we're talking about the ability to inject a megawatt in 20 minutes in the middle of a city, multiplied by 300 because you've got 300 buses at that depot. Grid's not designed for that. How do we plan for that? That's the question I would put to the utilities. And that's a lot more than how many EVs are going to be in the neighborhood.
Right.
And how to do that in a cost-effective way.
Yeah.
To pick up on Ken's point, I totally agree. There's a real risk here of like charger dumping, and so many of these, and it's going to just end up costing everybody more. What we want to do is bring the cost down. If we get it wrong and it's uncoordinated and messy, which it is, it's just going to make it that much more expensive for everybody.
And I think we heard some comments this morning about, that can actually have that negative effect of kind of sending the sustainability train back in the wrong direction, right? We think that the price signal should incentivize people to want to, answer those questions. But if you get it wrong enough times, people just kind of go, you know what, maybe we're not ready for this. And hate to see this all unravel.
Yeah, hate to see the ball unravel. And it would be, we all know demand charges are a really big problem, but they really, really are. It's not just we read about it, but I mean, some of the fleets that I'm working with, they are literally looking at, well, wait a minute, if we charge, that could cost us $2,417. I mean, these numbers are ridiculous.
Yeah, right.
And so so that's grid capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really comes back to where we started, and that is that collaboration across industries, across partnerships is really important for us to be successful going forward. Well, thank you all for joining me today. Excellent panelists. Thank you to the audience, too, for joining us for this important conversation. Before we wrap, just want to remind you that we have some really cool electric vehicles on display in EV Alley, multiple options for electric fleets. And then also, if you've enjoyed this conversation, we're going to continue to talk about electric transportation in the experience in the hub, which is starting right now. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.